same one.
As soon as I saw the curve, I knew.
Okay,
I'm making more
so
than
my name is Tato, and my public speaking muscles are a little bit out of shape, like the rest of my muscles. But hey, it's been a little bit. So basically, what we're here to do today is to teach you guys how to run intervals. And intervals have kind of a cool backstory in this area. And I think I see some new faces that I haven't seen before, but I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the history of what we've been doing. So about 3 years ago, right, I was fighting in this tournament, against Keep 2015, right? And like I was really close to winning, right? I came back in this really furious thunderstorm in Sword and Board, and then in Florentine, I got knocked out of this bracket by this guy who was just like, he was gonna do whatever it took to win. You know what I mean? I got really upset. And I remember earlier that year, he brought me this book, right? It's called Higher, Faster, Stronger. I forget the author right now. But I thought back to that book after he did that in this big sour temper tantrum, and I thought, this jerk is not gonna know anything that I don't know, right? So as I read through this book, I started realizing, like, wait a minute, like what's the typical approach to learning how to fight, right? It's what I like to lovingly refer to as the Dragon Ball Z method, where you're just like, okay, fight more, fight stronger people, fight stronger people. And it sounds like an anime. And if you know anything about anime, totally sweet, realism's not there, right? So we started to look to sports science to kind of answer our questions about how can we make good fighters and how can we make fighters improve faster, right? So when we started doing that, I had a lot of cooperation from a lot of people who've really helped me kind of show this method. And it's been a really wild ride for the past 2 years. This is year 3 of this, and I can kind of confidently say that, has anybody ever heard that, like, you know, Texas fighters are always better? Like, our area can't really compete with, like, the Texas and New Mexico area. And I'm finding that it's getting closer and closer to not being true anymore, right? Like, our guys that have been doing this for about 2 years are now very competitive fighters, you know, without even really having traveled quite as much as required for me to get to that level, right? So I think that we've really stumbled onto something, but more importantly, we've really stumbled onto something that's really fun, so it's really positive, and shows people like, hey, you can do this, you can be an athlete. And you guys, like, some of you guys might be like, well, you know, like, I'm not really an athlete, I like role play, I like class games and that kind of stuff. You are an athlete. If anybody's played Phoenix League, you've seen that since version 8, where we have this unlimited life pool area, that we're starting to balance our game more towards, like, cardiovascular activity or more difficult activities like warlord sports, tourneys, and that kind of stuff. So you guys are athletes, right? Whether, you know, popular society wants to tell you, you know, you guys are nerds, you don't play football, you don't play soccer. And if you've ever been to a football game, I'm sure you've noted this, hey, this looks a lot like cosplay. I know that's not Colin Kaepernick sitting up here in the stands. I know that's not him, right? So anyway, that's just kind of my introduction to this activity. You guys are about to, like, open the gate on some really fun, high-level stuff. And it's tough at first, but we're going to teach you guys how to do this, and in a couple of months, you'll be like, man, like, this is such a great sport. Like, this isn't just a great lord. Stick tag is a great sport. It's a lot of fun. So we're going to go over what intervals are, and kind of a little bit more specifics about where they came from in the psychology real quick before we launch into the actual practical part of the class, right? So intervals are time periods of intermittent drilling spaced through fighting, right? Or fight modifiers. So we fight for a little bit, we catch about 30 seconds of a drill, and then we continue fighting, and we might catch a little bit more of a drill, then we take a break and get some water and do it again, right? So here's the psychology behind the approach. I always found this stuff to be really interesting. So who here's played high school sports? Right? So you guys remember, like, football and basketball, where basketball looked like, okay, we're going to do 20 minutes of passing, we're going to do 20 minutes of free throws, we're going to do 20 sets of suicides, and then we're going to go home. And then we're going to lose to the next town over because their guys are bigger and stronger than us, right? So what you start noticing about high school sports that they all have in common is they're not nearly as good as professional sports players, right? Because those professional sports coaches have put a lot of time and money into researching the best way to get the ball from point A to point B, like millions of dollars, like unfortunately probably more money than they spend on cancer, right? But like if we start like looking at the research that these guys have laid down for us, we could find kind of a better road to get to where we want to go in terms of skill, right? So the way that these college teams, these professional teams train is they scrimmage, right? They'll scrimmage for a short period of time, and they'll blow a whistle, and they'll call it a drill, and they'll blow a whistle, and they'll go back to scrimmaging, like playing half-court basketball, playing half-court soccer, like that kind of stuff, right? So this is actually built off of the way that those professional sports teams train. So this is beneficial because your brain's not meant to be bored, right? The old way that we used to teach people to fight was we're going to say, okay, Tuesday, we're going to do block strike until our hands throb and ache. And if you go to bed without numb hands from carpal tunnel, you're not working hard enough. Well, the problem is, there's two problems. A, it really sucks, right? And nobody wants to do that. B, it's really boring, right? Your brain's not made to be bored. Your brain is meant to seek out novel stimuli and be challenged by the changing pace of things. And the other part of it is your brain kind of thinks that it masters something a lot quicker than it actually does, right? Like your brain will be like, okay, 30 seconds of block strike, I'm a pro, I got this, right? And you settle into that rhythm and you do pretty good. And then you wait a little bit and try to do more block strike and it doesn't work out for you anymore. So this also leverages an educational concept called effortful recall, right? Where your brain is forced to attempt to remember how to do something that's just a little bit far from it. And it kind of fires those electrons down those neurons and connects that path that your neurons take to throw this shot, to catch this block, to recognize what that posture looks like, right? So that switching between those tasks essentially keeps resetting that process. It keeps forcing us to recall, hey, this drill means I need to do this, this, and watch for this, right? And the more that you do that, the more you try to recall something that's a little bit far from you, the faster you will learn it. So we found that not only is this way more fun, but it builds better fighters faster for less work. Like, you don't often find anything like that in life where something gets more fun, easier, and better, like all at once, for just a little bit of elbow grease. So that's basically a real basic introduction to like the psychology of why we do this, just so you know that this isn't something that like I had some weird wild turkey induced fever dream and said, okay guys, let's do this. Now it's a product of a lot of careful research. Not that I wasn't also having that fever dream at the time. But Higher, Faster, Stronger is a really great book, and that's where this came from. So if you're interested, I would recommend picking that up. We don't bring enough sports science into this hobby. We should be looking for better ways to do those kinds of things, but this is one of them. So two components, right? There's fighting, or as you guys will learn later, but not today, fight modifiers, where we fight under a little bit different of rules than the normal shot-taking rules. But today, it's just fighting. That's your scrimmaging, right? It's just winners, losers. Like if you have two people, you just spar, right? If you have a group of people, you play winners, losers. Who's played winners, losers here before? More or less everyone. But it's basically just a way of finding you a new and fresh fighting partner very quickly. So you fight, if you win, you put up a W and you call out win, and then you look for somebody else that matches your sign, and then you tap in and fight those guys, right? But during an interval, it's not quite the same thing as an event style winner losers, right? We're looking to minimize our turnaround between fights. So that means if these two guys are fighting, I'll stay a safe distance away. If I can't find anybody else that has a sign, I'll watch and see who won, and then I'll try to fight that guy, right? You kind of have to try to stalk some of these other fights and watch how they resolve and try to get with that winner or that loser as quickly as you can, right? So that's the fighting component. So the drilling component is more complex, and that's where we're going to be putting our elbow grease in today, right? So the drilling component, it's difficult, and it requires a very dense vocabulary of different activities that's going to take you guys all time to build, right? So when you hear our app call out like, hey, ABA or BAB, you might not know what that means, and that's okay. This is how everybody learns those concepts, right? So essentially, if the drill gets called out and you see somebody who's like, what is CNC like? What does that even stand for? Like comments and critique? Like, yeah. So if you see somebody that looks like they don't know what they're doing and you happen to know that drill, you have to go over and try to teach it to them within about 30 seconds, right? So we're gonna get a basic introduction to 5 or 6 of those drills today. And that's all I'm gonna make you guys learn today. On the CG Dojo YouTube page, we have short instructional videos on all of the drills. Now what we're not gonna do today is run like a class where we're going to be block striking, right? And he's going to come over and very clearly and hit me in the forearm, like over here. And I'm going to be like, that's wrong, your hand needs to be higher. Like, that's not what we're going to do. All you need to do, we're not critiquing that form yet. That's something that you'll do on your own time. All we're trying to do right now is get the basic instructions of those drills down so that we can remember them, understand them, perform them by the rules of the drill without really any regard to quality right now, because that quality is something that you have to build over a period of months and years. And be able to explain them to someone else if they've never heard of them before. So those are your objectives, right? Obviously perform them to the best of your ability, but remember, like, you guys are going to struggle. I'm asking you to do things that are new. I'm asking you to do things that are not at the usual pace of fighting, or maybe not how you would like to fight. And the other part of it is, I really want people to understand that these drills are a sandbox for you to play with, right? They take a component part of fighting, like the exchange, the outside of range position, like countering. They take it down and they force you to work on that component, right? One thing I've discovered about myself recently was we have these new fight modifiers where you don't take certain shots, and we have an arms only modifier where it only take a hit if you get hit like in the forearm. And I found out in the past couple of months that I am sort of miserably bad at that, because I'll take every fight to that person's body, right? And the problem is, outside of the context of a drill where I'm not allowed to do it, I'm going to try to make that work for me every time. And unfortunately for me, I'm very good at not doing the thing that I need to work on to get better, because I'm so good at the thing that I don't need to work on anymore, right? So does that make some sense? Like, that's why we take those component parts and work on them in isolation. So think of the drill as a little place to experiment in a particular section of the fight. Make sense to you guys? Okay. I think that was probably the best I've ever nailed that explanation. So I've had intervals of running these classes and then taking a break from running these classes and high-fiving myself and then running more of these classes. So anyway. So we're not going to give you like a lot of pointers of here is how you murder people, right? We're just going to give you the instructions for those drills. But here's some general defense pointers. We're going to do a lot of single sword drills today. It can really help to try to block far away from your body. And I'm not going to explain the geometric concepts of why, because that's another hour-and-a-half class. But if you're having trouble catching those blocks by pushing your hand out and blocking far away from your body, always try to mix up your targets. We're going to have some drills where we fight with a limited number of quadrants available to us. You want to make sure that you hit both of those quadrants. And always make sure you bend your knees. Like, if you're block striking, you don't move your feet. Don't practice from this position where we're like, General Bourbon's word, speaking to our soldiers. Just make sure that you're down in a decent stance with your knees bent and comfortable to accurately simulate the way that you fight. Drills need to accurately simulate the way that you fight. Okay, so I should have updated this. I'm going to have my instructors that I spoke to prior to the class come up here so you guys can get a look at who does that. Right, so you're up. Okay, so I think typically we try to get it such that we have a 1-to-1 instructor to student ratio, but we had a very good turnout of students. So you guys are going to have to pair up 2 at a time, and these guys who have done intervals before are going to show you how to, including myself, show you how to perform each of these drills, right? So we're going to do a quick walkthrough. You guys can come back. I just wanted to make sure that you saw.
I literally just counted that same thing.
Yeah.
It's literally 2 to 1.
9 instructors, 18 students.
Perfect.
Okay, drill number 1, right? There is a category of drills that we refer to as block striking, right? So block strike is kind of practicing the exchange portion of the fight, which means that if we have, like Hobie, please. So if Hobie and I sit, like if we kind of come in and having a fight, and we come to this point where we can both kind of hit each other in the same quadrants at the same reach, because we're about the same height, right? Block strike is that situation where we're both kind of throwing the optimal shot to hit the other opponent, and we're making sure that we don't get hit by anything by blocking with our stick, right? So you'll understand what I'm talking about when you see the pattern. But basically what it looks like is Hobie's going to initiate and throw. I'm going to try to block. I'm not hand blocking. I'm not getting hit in the body. I'm attempting to block. If you two get hit, don't worry about it. Just keep trying to not get hit, and eventually you won't get hit so much anymore. And then, after I catch that block, I throw back. And he throws back. And I throw back. And he throws back. This is the basic block strike pattern. Right? So, block strike is a kind of an archetype of drill, right? So we have 3 versions of this. So we have top quadrants block strike. We have chest on hip block strike, and we have arm off hip block strike. And I'm going to show you them one at a time. We're going to do the most work on top quadrants, right? Well, what do we mean by top quadrants? Well, if we take Hobie and divide him into 4 pieces, right? So we're going to go straight down the middle from his nose down to his sternum, right? That's our vertical line. Our horizontal line is kind of right under the pectoral, right? Right here. So you have quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't worry about what number they are. It doesn't matter. Just remember that there's 4, and that dictates what targets we're going to swing at when we block strike, right? Because if we break it down to a narrower number of quadrants for us to swing at, we get more focused practice on those targets. And additionally, if Hobie and I are fighting and we're not doing anything like too extravagant with our feet or our hips and kind of just coming together at this conservative pace, the first thing we can reach, please stand flat to me, is here, right? I can reach his chest. If his arm is out here, I can definitely reach that too, but without moving forward or pushing my shoulder closer to him by either leaning forward or moving, like dropping at the leg, I can't hit him in the hips. I can't even hit him like in the face, right? Like as this kind of spear comes forward and envelops him, the first available quadrants are these top 2 quadrants, right? So that's the furthest position away that we fight each other from, because it's the first thing that we can threaten. And that first thing that we can threaten, since that happens in pretty much every single fight that you have those quadrants threatened, that's why we kind of spend the most time trying to refine this position. Whereas a lot of the time, if Hobie and I are fighting, and I throw like a horizontal chop, sometimes he'll just hit me in the arm and kill me, right? And he doesn't have to worry about these little quadrants. They never become available to him because he never needs them. That makes sense? So top quadrant block strike, we take those top 2 quadrants, split them down the middle, split him underneath the pectoral, and we're only swinging at this quadrant and this quadrant. So that means typically their sword arm and their offside chest. Some people say back body. I don't say back body. Back body doesn't refer to a discriminate body part. Because it's the back, which is huge, especially if you're in the body, which is the whole thing. So I don't call it that. I call it the chest. So we're going to swing to the sword arm and the chest. So he's going to throw, and I'm going to throw. He throws, I throw. Back and forth. And we're not going to kind of juke down and hit him in the hip, because we're just working on that first phase of combat, like I showed you guys before. Just go to a nice clip. And you'll see maybe we'll get a little bit quicker if we want to. And you see how he's attacking both quadrants. And he's also attempted to attack both quadrants with multiple attacks, like multiple different kinds. Did you see how he had a forearm chop up here? And he also had a reverse wrap down here. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take this little sandbox of being able to reach those top 2 quadrants and express lots of options without getting hit. But for now, focus on your defense. Is that understandable, you guys? So pace is just block, throw, or as it were, block, strike, block, strike, block, strike. So get with your, let's get our instructors out. Let's spread out and kind of file in to get instructors. Make sure that you grab people to work with. Probably found out there's lots of different little aspects to it, right? And you guys probably all got a different piece from a different instructor. So that's a good thing, right? That keeps what would be kind of a monotonous activity diverse. So one important thing that I heard about that I forgot to talk about was what you do with your feet when you block strike, right? So for the purposes of this drill, we are practicing that max range that I showed you guys with Hobie, right? That we can kind of both equally hit each other in those top quadrants. So what you do is, with your lead foot, right, we pin that one down, and you are allowed to step with that back foot to change up how the geometry kind of fits around. So you are allowed to experiment with that when you are comfortable with the pacing of the activity. Does that make sense? As long as you keep that front foot down, the back foot you're allowed to move. My recommendation is keep it simple for yourself first. Stay where you're at, and when you're comfortable catching those blocks and throwing shots back, then add that complexity afterwards. Right? That's what we mean when we say the drills are a sandbox for you to experiment with. So, drill 2, Mr. Truck. So we just did top quadrants block strike. Remember, we divide him this way. We divide him down the middle and underneath the pectoral. We just practiced reading it. These 2 quadrants. Now we're going to shift one quadrant down, right? So we're going to take the on side quadrant and shift that down. What does on mean? On means the hand that's holding the sword, right? So if he's right-handed, we're going to shift this quadrant down. If he's left-handed, we'll switch this one down, right? So the 2 quadrants that I'm going to be swinging at are here, and no, sorry, I messed that up. I got that backwards. Backwards. We're going to switch on hip.
Chest and on hip.
Chest and on hip, right? We're going to switch the chest side. I forgot that we removed on and off to make it easier because of exactly the mistake that I just made. We're going to do chest and on hip, right? So we have chest and on hip. So we're going to move this down and hit this side, right? So, turn. Same block strike pattern. I'm going to throw his chest, and he can throw wherever he wants. So he threw to my on-side hip, the hip on the side that's holding the sword. And I throw back. He throws back. I throw back. And you'll notice that when I block this lower quadrant, I'm bending my knee a little bit to get used to changing that z-axis up and down a little bit. It's a more efficient way of kind of catching that lower quadrant shot as opposed to like just pinning it to my hip. I'm going to stop it early, so that means I go out and hold that out a little bit lower, right? All right, swing back, chest. And you'll notice I'm not swinging at this arm up here, right? I'm swinging down low. You might get hit in the arm a little bit because you're trying to block this hip. So you're putting your arm down there, but I am swinging it this quadrant and this quadrant. Does that make sense to you guys? So if it doesn't make sense, the instructors will help you out. So also, the reason we use on hip is because if I fight with my left hand, right? If I switch, now we're going to swing at this hip and my chest over here. That makes sense? That's why we use that on-off designation, right? So he's going to throw at this hip. Same activity, our quadrants are different, and you will find that the shot combinations and the flow changes just a little bit, but it's really just more of the same thing. Does that make sense? Okay, so do you have a question?
I was going to say distinguish between hip and leg.
What?
Distinguish hip versus leg.
Hip versus leg. So, a lot of people use like briefs for their line. I like to use the base of my groin, right? And I go around like that because it just gets a straight line from under your butt around. You don't want to hit people like in the leg because it doesn't take as much technical practice to be able to throw this, although you can work leg shots into your game, and that's complicated. We're just not going to work on that slash. It's much more technically difficult to throw to that hip, right? So I like to use base of my butt around. Anything above that line is hip, and then you're dead. Anything below that line or on that, anything on that line or above is hip. Anything below that line is leg. That makes sense? So if you throw, right, and he doesn't block, but like if I hit him low, technically that's a failure for me. It's not a success, right? It's not a successful hit, so you still have to mentally distinguish between those two things. Make sense? Questions? Yeah. Instructors match up with different students. All right, so third and last version of block strike specifically is arm and off hip block strike. Arm and off hip. So it's just the reverse of chest and on hip. Sorry about the confusion in the last set. I started mentally switching those two. I'm tired from my drive. This is arm and off hip. So we get thrash up here. So for the previous drill, chest and on hip, we were hitting this side and the on side hip, right? Now we're going to attack the off side hip, or the hip that's not on the same side as the sword, and the arm that's holding the sword, right? And I'm going to give you an essential tip, and do not forget this, right? I want you people to stand with your off foot forward. It'll help you remember offside, right? Because what can happen, right, as we begin to assail this offside hip, if he doesn't have his off foot forward, is I'll hit him straight in the groin, and your set will be over, right? So we want to try to, yes, you do have to block for that, but we also don't want to prematurely end our practice session, because I imagine everyone with about 3 hearts, like the beginning of Zelda, and it's like 2 hearts to get hit there, so you're done if you hit there too much. I'm sure everybody's been there, right? But off foot forward, and we're striking that sword arm over here, and we're striking the offside hip over here. I feel that this is the simplest split in block strike, the simplest division of quadrants, so we're not going to spend the most time on this, right? But it just looks the same as the other ones, except we're standing in a slightly different configuration. Hitting the off hip and the sword arm. Make sense? Okay, instructors, grab different students. Great. In all combat, standing still can be real easy, right? But at some point, we do have to practice our footwork. We practice our footwork a lot, right? So basically, there's lots of other footwork drills. So we're going to work on ABA, right? ABA is essentially using the skills that you build in block strike to aggressively close against your opponent to make them throw an attack that you want them to throw, and then kill them for it, right? But all you need to worry about before you try to get to that end goal of being able to plan that out is being able to go through those motions and remember what the pattern basically looks like. So for ABA, block strike is the only drill where we have target restrictions, right? For ABA, you can hit anything. It's much preferred that you hit people in the hips and up, because again, the leg stuff is technical and interesting, but it's not quite within the scope of the drill that we want to do. It's a little bit more difficult to hit someone in the hip than down low in the leg. So we want to work on that first to kind of broaden our horizons, right? So ABA is a real simple 3-shot pattern, right? So what will happen is we will stand about a comfortable lunging distance apart from each other, not too far, right? We're not trying to like do our maximum lunge distance, just a nice, good, comfortable step. So about this far, that's fine. You don't have to like, okay, I'm gonna lunge, and it's gonna be awesome, right? You don't have to do that.
Jump.
Just from here, you're gonna lunge in, and I'm going to throw. He's gonna throw back. I'm going to throw back, right? That's it. And then we step back and get back to that comfortable lunge distance, right? And then it's his turn to lead. So he lunges and throws, I block, throw back, block again, right? So now it's my turn. I lunge and throw, block and throw. So you'll notice the lunger initiates the contact, throws the first shot. blocks, and throws a second time. The standing person blocks, throws one shot back, and blocks again. And the roles switch, right? So, lunger throws. Now he's the lunger and I'm standing. And once he makes first contact with my equipment, when I'm standing, when he lunges in, go ahead, I'm allowed to take a small step back after that happens to maintain the range. Also, because remember, we need our drills to accurately simulate combat, right? So this isn't the way, I don't want you to do ABA by going like this, right? Like, he's not allowed to throw back at me to stop me. He's not allowed to step to get out of my way. So I'm just gonna hit him, probably twice, right? So you have to keep in mind the meta of the drill is trying to force you to work on this opening phase. So I don't want to lunge. I don't want to lunge too deep. That makes sense. I want to lunge just enough to hit the thing that I want, because he's not allowed to like evade me otherwise. That makes sense? Okay, you guys think you're ready to try that out? ABA stands for attack, block, attack. And it is the thing that the lunger does. The moving fighter attacks, blocks, and attacks. It's a good way to remember it. Thank you, Thrash. Questions? Okay, not too bad. And remember, you want to use, especially ABA, as kind of a sandbox to try different moves, different combinations, moving laterally, moving offline. It's your space to play with that opener, right? Like if I'm fighting Blaze, and I want to practice that opener, and we're just sparring, we actually take our shots, I'll come in, and maybe he'll block and kill me, right? That might not work, right? Or I come in, I throw, and then we have like this thing where we come outside, and maybe I want to like juke around a little bit to try to settle into the fight. But, and that's good practice, but if my objective was to practice that, I just wasted a ton of time, right? Because I wasn't practicing exactly the thing that I wanted to focus on. That's why we break this down into component parts. So, the next one and the last one we're going to do before our first interval is BAB, right? It's the opposite. Unfortunately, it is just a little bit easier cardiovascularly. So, Nate, come back up. Sorry, I know I'm being demanding. So, BAB is kind of our recovery drill, and it teaches you to snap back into position when you're not exactly ready to fight, right? So we have a stander and a walker. And the walking person, since they're moving, BAB is an acronym, block, attack, block, for what they're going to do. So if I'm walking and Blaze is standing, I walk forward, and when he's in range, when I'm in range, he throws, I block, throw back once, and he throws back. Done. And you'll notice I'm going to walk again. When he throws, I have to suddenly drop from an unprepared stance into a prepared stance, right? And it teaches you to find that orientation very quickly, right? That's kind of the real power behind it. It's also a good way of practicing a little bit more footwork and being a little bit more conscious of your feet without being quite as difficult as ABA and while being a little bit more defensive. So, you see what the walker and the stander do. Now we're going to do the drill and reverse roles the way that we're supposed to in the interval. So I'm walking first, I walk in, and then we set. We get a little space to reset. I walk in, he walks in, I walk in, block, attack, block. He walks in, blocks, attacks, and blocks. That make sense? Questions on that one?
The guy with the rum shirt guitar.
Who's speaking? No. Nobody?
No,
Okay, sorry. I thought someone else was asking a question. You got any questions? Get with the instructor. Go over BAB. I want to talk about a couple things first. The first thing I'm going to talk about is cardio. And it's a little bit more difficult to manage than you might initially think. It's kind of a skill that you have to build up, right? You want to keep yourself pretty tired, not exhausted. If you exhaust yourself, the pacing of the activity, you're not going to recover in 20 minutes, right? And not be able to continuously play. So you want to keep yourself at like a 3 or a 4 tiredness, right? So what's nice about being tired when you do this is the effort kind of strips you of your physical powers, right? If you have a real explosive lunge, as you get out of breath, you're going to find that your lunge range is kind of reduced, and it kind of becomes a great equalizer between experience levels and physical prowess levels, when both guys are getting pretty tired. The second part is you have to think your way through every part of the fight when you can no longer like fly around the field, right? You're not getting that 5-minute break between fights anymore. You actually have to fight conservatively. If you just don't go to the brink, right? Like, don't go to like, I'm totally sick and gonna throw up. You're not gonna stand back up, and you'll go in and you might feel like you're wasting your time at that point. So remember, keep it at a 3 or a 4. You'll build up in time, right? It takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but you'll build up. Feel free to skip around, like if you need to catch your breath and you think you're going to be sick, especially in this heat and this humidity, right? A good way of thinking about endurance is you want to think of like aggressive fighting as being like, you want to think of your endurance as mana points or magic points in an RPG, right? That regenerate slowly over time. And if you use all of your NP at once, right, you're not going to have any sweet stuff when you need it, and you're going to have to use just really basic attacks. So you want to kind of just pace your consumption of that endurance. We find that to be a pretty helpful example. All right, so you might think like, why are we doing an activity this hard when fighting isn't as difficult physically is what we're going to do. It does a couple of really important things. First of all, you guys, I'm sure you're familiar with the Warlord sports style of tourney that's very physically rigorous, right? Having a big gas tank for that kind of tournament is essential. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of people by the time they get to like board, even like category number 3, they're like sagging and having a rough time because they don't have the conditioning to get through it. And they also don't have the understanding of how to carefully pace the consumption of your energy, right? It's an important skill to build. The second thing is fighting when you're really tired, really exhausted. It builds a lot of courage to keep going, right? Like if you're down 2 fights in a best 3 of 5, you might remember that time when you hung on through the last set. You know what I mean? So basically, we're seeking to overbuild our engine and underrun it. Make sense? Okay. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about attitude before your first interval. So you get out of intervals what you put in. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean like going for broke and smoking yourself and hurting yourself, right? But you get out of it what you put in. Keep an open mind and don't worry about your kill-death ratio, right? This is your sandbox. This is your lab to kind of experiment with different things and having to recall the drills, having to have fun and teach each other like how to perform each activity, right? This is a community exercise. You get out of it what you put in. This is all just practice. It's just information being provided to you as rapidly as possible. So unfortunately, me saying, hey guys, have a good attitude, and then everyone just does it and no one ever makes a mistake or gets mad again, like, it's probably a flight of fantasy. So here's some tricks to keep your head cool, right? When someone kills you, no matter what it is, just shout good and smile at them, right? Like even if it's not how you would prefer they fight or prefer they throw, my argument is if you're dead, you don't have a lot to complain about, right? So get excited for the other guy when they win. That helps a lot more than you would think. You would be surprised how much that by itself will help keep you calm. And second part, be as invested in your training partner's experience as you are in your own, right? You can only stand as high as the other people around you. That's kind of the limiter on your growth, is the fighting of the guy who's almost as good as you, right? So you need to make sure that you are investing liberally in the experience of people who are newer to INTs. You need to invest liberally in the experience of people who are maybe not super serious about winning tournaments but want to put in more. Make sure it's fun for those guys too. Call your shots as quickly as possible with zero expectation that the other guy takes this. Don't hear that as like, well, I don't have to take my shots, nobody's going to get upset about it, right? But we are going to get real tired, and people are going to slow down, they're going to have trouble processing it, right? So if that happens, just sound good, smile, deep breath, keep going, right? You're going to be tired, you're going to be winded, you might miss stuff, you know, your friend might miss stuff. If you miss something, don't worry about it, just say, I was wrong, I didn't realize that I got hit. You won. Just leave it to that. So we're trying to get as many fights as possible, so you don't want to have to engage in long discussions of who hit what, right? It's a practice, man. Who cares, right? If you got hit, and you need to stop that from happening. Hydrate each round. You want to take a sip of water in between each round. If you're thirsty, It's already too late, man. You're dehydrated for the day. Like, make sure that you're keeping up on that. Make sure that you guys focus on the task at hand, right? Get your next fight as fast as possible. Perform your drills as cleanly as possible and focus on the motions, not necessarily getting hit or not, right? Like, just make sure that you're trying to get a good quality practice. Even down to drinking water, you want to focus on the task at hand. The results, that KDR ratio, that'll take care of itself as long as you focus on the process. I want to talk about a couple of things first. The first thing I'm going to talk about is cardio. And this is a little bit more difficult to manage than you might initially think. It's kind of a skill that you have to build up, right? You want to keep yourself pretty tired, not exhausted. If you exhaust yourself, the pacing of the activity, you're not going to recover in 20 minutes, right? And not be able to continuously play. So you want to keep yourself at like a 3 or a 4 tiredness, right? So what's nice about being tired when you do this is the effort kind of strips you of your physical powers, right? If you have a real explosive lunge, as you get out of breath, you're going to find that your lunge range is kind of reduced, and it kind of becomes a great equalizer between experience levels and physical prowess levels when both guys are getting pretty tired. The second part is you have to think your way through every part of the fight when you can no longer like fly around the field, right? You're not getting that 5-minute break between fights anymore. You actually have to fight conservatively. If you just don't go to the brink, right? Like, don't go to like, I'm totally sick and gonna throw up. You're not gonna stand back up, and you'll go in and you might feel like you're wasting your time at that point. So remember, keep it at a 3 or a 4. You'll build up in time, right? It takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but you'll build up. Feel free to skip around, like if you need to catch your breath and you think you're going to be sick, especially in this heat and this humidity, right? A good way of thinking about endurance is you want to think of like aggressive fighting as being like, you want to think of your endurance as mana points or magic points in an RPG, right? That regenerate slowly over time. And if you use all of your MP at once, right, you're not going to have any sweet stuff when you need it, and you're going to have to use just really basic attacks. So you want to kind of just pace your consumption of that endurance. We find that to be a pretty helpful example. All right, so you might think like, why are we doing an activity this hard when fighting isn't as difficult physically as what we're going to do? It does a couple of really important things. First of all, you guys, I'm sure you're familiar with the Warlord sports style of tourney that's very physically rigorous, right? Having a big gas tank for that kind of tournament is essential. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of people by the time they get to like board, even like category number 3, they're like sagging and having a rough time because they don't have the conditioning to get through it. And they also don't have the understanding of how to carefully pace the consumption of your energy, right? It's an important skill to build. The second thing is, fighting when you're really tired, really exhausted, it builds a lot of courage to keep going, right? Like if you're down 2 fights in a best 3 of 5, you might remember that time when you hung on through the last set, you know what I mean? So basically we're seeking to overbuild our engine and underrun it. Make sense? Okay. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about attitude before your first interval. So you get out of intervals what you put in. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean like going for broke and smoking yourself and hurting yourself, right? But you get out of it what you put in. Keep an open mind and don't worry about your kill-death ratio, right? This is your sandbox. This is your lab to kind of experiment with different things and having to recall the drills, having to have fun and teach each other like how to perform each activity, right? This is a community exercise. You get out of it what you put in. This is all just practice. It's just information being provided to you as rapidly as possible. So unfortunately, me saying, hey guys, have a good attitude, and then everyone just does it and no one ever makes a mistake or gets mad again, like, it's probably a flight of fantasy. So here's some tricks to keep your head cool, right? When someone kills you, no matter what it is, just shout good and smile at them, right? Like, even if it's not how you would prefer they fight or prefer they throw, my argument is if you're dead, you don't have a lot to complain about, right? So get excited for the other guy when they win. That helps a lot more than you would think. You would be surprised how much that by itself will help keep you calm. And second part, be as invested in your training partner's experience as you are in your own, right? You can only stand as high as the other people around you. That's kind of the limiter on your growth, is the fighting of the guy who's almost as good as you, right? So you need to make sure that you are investing liberally in the experience of people who are newer to ints. You need to invest liberally in the experience of people who are maybe not super serious about winning tournaments, but want to put in work. Make sure it's fun for those guys too. Call your shots as quickly as possible, with zero expectation that the other guy takes this. Don't hear that as like, well, I don't have to take my shots, nobody's going to get upset about it, right? But we are going to get real tired, and people are going to slow down or have trouble processing it, right? So if that happens, just sound good, smile, deep breath, keep going, right? You're going to be tired, you're going to be winded, you might miss stuff, your friend might miss stuff. If you miss something, don't worry about it, just say, I was wrong, I didn't realize that I got hit. You won. Just leave it to that. So we're trying to get as many fights as possible, so you don't want to have to engage in long discussions of who hit what, right? It's a practice, man. Who cares, right? If you got hit, you got hit, and you need to stop that from happening. Hydrate each round. You want to take a sip of water in between each round. If you're thirsty, it's already too late, man. You're dehydrated for the day. Like, make sure that you're keeping up on that. Make sure that you guys focus on the task at hand, right? Get your next fight as fast as possible. Perform your drills as cleanly as possible, and focus on the motions, not necessarily getting hit or not, right? Like, just make sure that you're trying to get a good quality practice. Even down to drinking water, you want to focus on the task at hand. The results, that KDR ratio, that'll take care of itself as long as you focus on the process. Time to learn some wax.
Learning wax is for nerds. Wait.
Come on, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it.
Damn it. All right. They can catch up. Combos is easier. All right. So, before we started working with more of these drills in different contexts, the expectation when I came up, right, was that you would do a lot of single sword drilling, and then just extrapolate all of that to combinations and magically get good without practicing it. And in retrospect, that made zero sense. So what we started doing was we started drilling with combinations as well. And it's weird to think of something like so basic as relatively new, but we started doing this in like 2012, whereas block strike began like, I don't even know, I think pre-2000s, right? So what we found was when we began drilling with combinations with the block strike, with two pieces of equipment, means that you can manage two quadrants at the same time, right? So it becomes kind of impossible to hit the other guy. So we came up, I shouldn't say we came up with the drill, but we combined all of the quadrants and doing a block strike pattern. We came up with grind, and we just named it grind because just to differentiate it from the other kinds of block strike and to make it less confusing. So, Maz is going to come up. And this is literally just block strike, but no quadrant restrictions, right? I still want you to hit people in the hip and not the leg for this drill, because the leg tends to happen from further away than we practice grind, so there's not a lot of point in practicing it from that range. But it's just block strike, no quadrant restrictions. You can hit any of the four, and you have a second piece of equipment in your hands. That makes sense. So just to demonstrate that. Feeling good? Mass throws. Good night. Good throws. 70. See, yeah, he can do whatever he wants. Like if he wants to throw a dark side and slow it down just a touch, he's allowed to do that. It's his time to practice that, right? So it's just block strike with the second piece of equipment. You will find that it's a little bit easier to like goof up the timing when you're doing grind with combinations, because now you can do two things at the same time. But I want you to keep the pacing of grind of block strike in mind when you grind, right? If you mess up, as with all mistakes, note it, move on, right? You just say sorry, you throw, and start it over again. Questions? Very simple, right? What's up?
So it's just any quadrant, as long as it's block strike.
Any quadrant, block strike timing, second piece of equipment. You do it with Florentine as well. You do it with down spear if you want to, but it just works. It's a little harder without a shield, in my opinion, because you have to be a little bit more technically proficient to catch all the blocks, but pretty simple concept. You guys ready to do that?
Yeah.
So, number 2 is ABA with combinations, right? Same exact concept, except now you have a second piece of equipment to block with, right? So I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on instruction with that. I'm going to do a quick walkthrough with Rel, just to show you guys what that looks like. Don't kill yourself doing this one in this heat before we go out and kill ourselves doing an interval. But it's the exact same thing. Sometimes the range will change a little bit, the shots will change, your options will change, but the pacing and the timing and the instructions are the same. I'm lunging first, I attack, block, and attack. Rel lunges. I lunge. I lunge. Attack, block, attack. Out loud. There you go. Make sense? Attack, block, attack. I think it's fun to say it, whether you're good at it or not. It's just, it feels very anime. You guys ready? Yep. Combination BAB, which I will do with Arcadus. Arcadus.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah. Arcadus.
Arcadus. Okay. That's not what I said. Arcadus. Okay. So BAB, same deal. Remember, you have a walker and a stander. The standing person throws the shot first. The acronym always refers to what the moving person is doing. Right? So I'm going to walk in on Arcadus. I'm going to walk in on Arcadus. He's going to throw. I snap into position, throw back. He throws back. Done. Reverse rolls. Walk. Whack, whack, whack. And I walk in. Walk, walk. Now out loud.
Block, attack, block.
Yeah. Walk in. Oop, I messed up. If you mess up, who cares, man? You have unlimited wax, mostly.
That was just counter.
You have unlimited, right? I walk in, I block, attack, block. He walks in, block, attack, block. There you go. Ready? This is just a final note. Usually I do this after both dance, but I want to get it out of the way so we can just rest when we're done with the second one, right? We're going to talk about building our culture. So one thing that people always miss in their rise to like warlord and top level fighter, right? Is a lot of the negativity and machismo that we apply to it is often just like it's really like living out a power fantasy, and it's not really useful to anybody, right? Like you need to build the community around you, because I mean you can go to any city and find all kinds of other sports, right? You can find baseball and football and MMA and boxing gyms and all that kind of stuff to be competitive, but like as a sport, like foam fighting just doesn't have the same level of participants where something like that can thrive or be an advantage, right? And even then, it's still living out that fantasy that people sell you about being a champion and an athlete, that you also need to be mean. And I'm very much also guilty of that, like in pre like 2013, 2014, 2015, just doing that kind of just stupid stuff that's not necessary. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything like that, but I want you to see that fighters can only stand as high as the system that supports them, right? And I truly think that if I was a little bit nicer to the people while I was coming up as a warlord, I would probably have a lot less arthritis because I would be fighting less often. And also I would probably have a master's degree because I wouldn't have to spend so much time practicing, right? So like if you have better quality opponents, right, it becomes like this multiplier in your own training. And if you have lots of other guys that they don't even have to be like the best of the best and stride for stride with you to push you. You just need lots of people having fun and exchanging ideas together. And for every new person you bring into that system, you do grow much, much faster because you're exposed to new ideas and new spins on the same couple of shots, right? So you need to invest heavily in your community. That's why positivity is king out here. And that's why this movement is actually working and changing things, because we're having a great time, right? Every fighter brings a stone to the mountain, right? If someone's like really new and they're just not doing so hot, there's no reason to be dismissive of that person just because they don't challenge you as much as another person. They might still hit you with something unexpected. They might cause you to learn or realize something interesting, right? So you need people of all levels to be doing this with you. Like if you try to like cash in on your rank and try to be mean, you are pulling that out of your own paycheck. In terms of skill, right? It's not a good investment strategy, right? Every engagement has that value. Increase the value of your time at the park. You guys also need to make sure that you're being a salesman of this paradigm, right? Like this is really tough. Ints are hard, but you need to be encouraging to the other people around you. If you have someone who comes in and out casually and maybe they do ints once a month, that guy is still valuable or girl is still valuable, right? They're still important. Try to gently bring them in a little bit more if you can, but if 1 or 2 a month is all they have in them, like that's fine, like that's still valuable. But you still need to make sure that you're continuously recruiting to practicing, because people, everyone, like I said, everyone who trains with you is going to force you to be just a little bit better, right? So embrace that positivity. It keeps people welcome and learning. You know, and the other part is like me and Hobie know each other real well. Like if I walk up and tell Hobie something like rude, like, you know, I'm a 7th Order of the Warrior on a good day, and on a bad day I'm a 5th, and maybe he's like struggling, right, to like engage with tournaments in general, or like maybe he doesn't, like maybe that's okay to him and he thinks that that's fine. But what if Bruin thinks that's super annoying, right? Like if we have that back and forth and Bruin's like, you guys are just jerks, I don't want to play with you, right? So you have to keep your whole audience in mind when you say those kinds of things, right? So always add, never subtract from fighting. There's never any reason to disengage anybody else. And like, if someone does something a little bit snouty, a little bit irritating, just don't engage with it, right? Just push out bad things by adding more and more good things until it just doesn't kind of have a place anymore. Also, the other thing that I think is really important, sometimes when people want to train, right, they overteach. Like they'll overstimulate someone's thinking with like, they'll throw lots of big words in there and they'll throw 100 concepts at once at someone that they're trying to change. And they do this with like with good expectations. But the problem is if Thrash is explaining a bunch of things to me that I don't understand, right? He's gonna turn me off, or he's gonna have me working on too many things at once, right? A person can really only focus on one kind of improvement at a time, and it really takes about 15 to 20 practices to lock that in. So just make sure that you're, I'm not saying don't teach, I'm saying don't over-teach. Like if you're trying to help someone out, give them one good pointer at a time, let them digest it and work on it. And if they ask you for more, do it. But just be careful not to invite yourself to tell them everything that you know about fighting. It doesn't come off as well as people think. That makes sense? Okay, any questions before we start our glorious combination and then collapse in a sweaty pile of heat stroke?
Our fuse